You're at a gathering, maybe a work event or a friend's birthday party. Someone walks up, smiles warmly, and introduces themselves. You hear their name. You nod. You say hello. And then, somewhere between that moment and your very next breath, the name simply vanishes. Gone. Like it was never spoken at all. You're standing there, still in the conversation, and already you're thinking, wait, what was it? Did it start with an M? Or was it a J? Meanwhile, they're talking about where they work or how they know the host, and you're only half listening because part of your brain is quietly panicking. You're already dreading the moment you'll need to introduce them to someone else. If this sounds painfully familiar, you're far from alone. This happens to people constantly, across all ages, all backgrounds, all levels of intelligence. And it almost never means what we fear it means. It doesn't mean you weren't paying attention. It doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. So why does it happen? Let's slow down and look at what's actually going on when a name slips away almost immediately. When you meet someone new, your brain is doing a surprising amount of work all at once. It's processing a face, a voice, body language, the context of the room, what you should say next, whether you're making a good impression, and somewhere in that flood of information, a name gets mentioned. Just once. Briefly. And your brain, already stretched thin, doesn't hold on to it. This is sometimes called an encoding issue, which simply means the name never really got stored in the first place. It's not that you forgot it. It's that it never fully landed. Your attention was split in too many directions at once, and the name got lost in the shuffle. But sometimes the name did get stored, and you still can't reach it. This is what's often called the tip of the tongue experience. You know it. You can almost feel it sitting just below the surface. Maybe you remember the first letter or how many syllables it has, but the full name refuses to come forward. It's like reaching for something on a high shelf that keeps sliding just out of grasp. The memory is there. It's just temporarily jammed. There's also something else happening, especially for people who tend to feel self-conscious in social situations. When you're worried about how you're coming across, when you're monitoring your own words or wondering if you're being awkward, that internal noise takes up mental space. And names, which are already tricky to remember because they're arbitrary and don't carry meaning on their own, get pushed aside. But sometimes it's not about anxiety at all. Even confident, socially relaxed people forget names regularly. The brain simply has limits on how much new information it can grab in a single moment, and names often fall outside that limit. Now let's look at 5 patterns that tend to show up again and again. Once you notice them, it can help make sense of why this keeps happening and why it's not your fault. One pattern is how differently we process faces compared to names. You might see someone across the room and instantly recognize them, but their name? Completely blank. This happens because faces are visual patterns. Your brain is wired to detect and remember them quickly. But a name is abstract. There's nothing about the sound Michael that connects to a specific person's appearance. Your brain has to build that link from scratch, and that takes more effort. Another pattern is remembering facts about someone but forgetting their name entirely. You might recall their job, a story they told, where they said they grew up, even what they were wearing, yet the name is nowhere to be found. This feels strange, but it makes sense. Facts connect to context and meaning. Names are just labels, floating without any built-in hooks. A third pattern involves timing. Sometimes a name you blanked on during a conversation will suddenly appear hours later. You're driving home or lying in bed, thinking about nothing in particular, and there it is. This happens because retrieval works differently when you're relaxed. Stress and pressure narrow your access to stored memories. Calm opens it back up. The name was there all along. You just couldn't reach it in the moment. And there's a reason this gets worse in groups that most people miss. A fourth pattern is that names tend to slip more easily in group settings. Think of your brain's short-term memory like a small notepad with limited space. In a one-on-one conversation, there's room to write clearly. You hear a name, you use it, it has time to settle. But in a group, you might be introduced to several people quickly, and suddenly it's like trying to scribble down too many things at once. The notepad fills up, the handwriting gets messy, and details start bleeding together. Your brain gets overloaded, and names begin falling through the cracks. And a fifth pattern involves interference. Similar sounding names can crowd each other out. Was it Karen or Catherine? Mark or Martin? When names share syllables or rhythms, they compete for the same mental space, and sometimes the wrong one wins. But sometimes names that aren't even similar get tangled up simply because they were heard within seconds of each other. So no, forgetting names doesn't mean you're unintelligent. It doesn't mean you're rude or indifferent. And it definitely doesn't mean you lack social skills. These are quiet fears many people carry, but they're based on a misunderstanding of how memory actually works. There's one loop worth noticing gently. Sometimes, when we've been embarrassed by forgetting names before, we start bracing for it. We get anxious before meeting anyone, and that pulls attention inward. We disengage slightly, maybe without realizing it, and that makes the problem worse. It becomes a cycle. Not a flaw, just a pattern. And patterns can shift. So what actually helps? One small thing is repeating someone's name naturally right after hearing it. Nice to meet you, Sarah. That brief echo gives your brain a second chance to hold on. You can take this a step further by saying the name while looking directly at the person's face. This helps your brain connect the sound to the visual, strengthening that name-face link that doesn't form automatically. Another approach is creating a quick mental image. If you meet someone named Lily, picture a flower. It doesn't have to be clever. It just gives the name something to stick to. Context cues work too. Notice where you were standing, what they were wearing, something about the setting. Anchoring the name to a sensory detail makes it easier to retrieve later. If you can, step aside after the introduction and discreetly type the name into a note on your phone. It might feel overly deliberate, but this small act reinforces the memory and gives you a backup if your brain fails you later. During a longer conversation, try using the name again naturally once or twice. This spacing reinforces it at different moments rather than relying on a single exposure. After the gathering, take a quiet moment to mentally review who you met. This simple replay helps shift names from short-term to longer-term memory. And if you blank under pressure, pause. Breathe. Sometimes the name is just out of reach, and pushing harder makes it worse. Relaxation often helps it surface. Most importantly, you're allowed to ask again. You might say, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name earlier. Would you remind me?" Or if someone's name is unfamiliar, "I want to make sure I'm saying your name right. How do you pronounce it again?" Both are calm, respectful, and most people appreciate the effort. None of these strategies are complicated. They're small, gentle adjustments that work with your brain instead of against it. So if you've ever felt quietly ashamed about forgetting a name seconds after hearing it, you can let that go. This is an ordinary, deeply human experience. It's not a reflection of your character or your capacity for connection. This is educational content and not a substitute for professional advice. If forgetting names or similar experiences are frequent and affecting your work or relationships, getting support and improving routines can help. If any of this felt familiar, you're not alone. Most of us are navigating the same quiet moments, hoping no one noticed. You noticed, though, and that matters.